Today, a small boat migrant has been jailed for at least 25 years for murdering a bank customer totally at random. Another day in modern Britain. Another day of chaos.
Not safe at all. I don't want to send her to school because there's so many attacks on the school.
14:30, Derby city centre. Inside a Lloyds bank, an asylum seeker stepped forward. No argument, no warning. One sudden act ended a life. The victim was Gurvinder Yoel, 37, a father of 3. The suspect arrived by small boat in October 2024. Authorities had been warned. No action followed. By the time the blood dried on the pavement, public trust had collapsed. The system did not break. It stood aside. That moment did not end on that street. It spread. Within hours, more than 20 migrant hotels were forced to move people out, and Britain followed. Stay with us, because what comes next begins inside the Commons.
This government allow thousands of unvetted males to enter this country who are going to commit horrific crimes like rape and murder, and there's some potential terrorists amongst them. And we don't want to see any of these silly tags put on their ankles. Just detain and deport straight away.
The Home Secretary did not respond. She turned the page of her briefing notes. The warning was issued. The demand was made. From the government, there was no movement, no adjustment, no urgency. The burden stayed where it always had, with the public. By late morning, endurance had reached its limit. People did not erupt. They decided. And they stopped standing still. 11:02 a.m. Canary Wharf was still operating normally, morning peak hours. No warnings, no lockdowns. 11:14 a.m. The first crowd gathered outside a migrant hotel. No stage, no organisers. Scattered chants began to rise, then repeated. Short, sharp, in sync. 11:27 a.m. Police were deployed. At first only enough to form a visible line. No dispersal order, no instructions to leave. The crowd continued to swell. 11:41 a.m. Metal barriers were erected. The atmosphere shifted immediately. The chants grew louder, denser, relentless. Pressure built from the back toward the front line. The barriers began to shake. 11:53 a.m. Shoving broke out. Shield met shield. Barriers rattled violently. One person was pushed back from the front line. No injuries. But the moment was captured on camera. Within minutes, the footage spread across social media. 12:06 p.m. The crowd surged. No longer hundreds, thousands. Police reinforced their numbers, forming tight defensive lines. Helmets, shields, batons deployed simultaneously. Chants echoed through the financial district. 12:18 p.m. Traffic was completely blocked. Buses stopped. Offices closed early. 12:31 p.m. The unrest spread to Epping, then to other locations. No longer a single hotspot, multiple fronts at once. According to reports and estimates throughout the day, tens of thousands were now involved across several areas. Police were no longer containing one site. They were chasing multiple flashpoints. This was no longer a handful of scattered gatherings. This was a wave forcing the system to retreat. According to preliminary reports from local authorities, more than 20 migrant hotels were forced into emergency evacuation. Not planning, not consultation, immediate evacuation. Coaches were deployed at short notice. Occupants were moved out quickly. Belongings were gathered in haste. Some hotels were completely emptied within hours. Others were temporarily shut down to avoid direct confrontation. These decisions did not come from central government. They were taken by local councils and commanders because maintaining the status quo was no longer possible. By mid-afternoon, police confirmed dozens of officers injured across multiple locations and more than 200 arrests, according to preliminary interforce reports for public order offences. The numbers continued to rise throughout the day. Businesses near flashpoints closed en masse. Major roads were sealed for extended periods. Public transport was partially suspended. Meanwhile, no national directive was issued, no unified instruction, no publicly stated response plan, no timeline for de-escalation. Instead, each local authority and police command was forced to make rapid decisions in isolation under emergency conditions. By evening, the Home Office acknowledged unrest, but continued to describe the situation as isolated incidents. Outside, the reality was different. More than 20 hotels had been cleared. People had been moved. Buildings had been shut, the ground situation had already changed. Power was no longer shaping events, it was reacting to them. The system did not lead, it retreated. What unfolded next was no longer a public order problem, it was a failure of governance at the centre of power. The issue was not ignorance. Briefings were available, figures were known, the scale was understood. What collapsed was decision-making. Every option carried political risk. Act decisively and face backlash. Hold back and hope the pressure fades. In that calculation, authority chose delay. This is what elite panic looks like. Not chaos, not shouting, but paralysis disguised as caution. When more than 20 migrant hotels had already been evacuated, when dozens of officers had been injured, when hundreds had been arrested, the continued framing of events as isolated was no longer credible. The system still existed, but it had stopped performing its core function, to decide when circumstances demand clarity. Power did not fall because it was overrun. It faltered because it refused to move first. Statements became softer, language became narrower. Responsibility was stretched thin across committees and departments, yet crises do not respond to phrasing, they respond to action. By the time senior figures acknowledged the severity, the ground reality had already shifted. Local authorities had acted, police commanders had adapted, facilities had been cleared. The centre, however, remained reactive. A governing system can survive criticism, it can survive unrest. What it cannot survive is the perception that it no longer governs. At that moment, the problem was no longer the street. It was the silence at the top. Once the centre stalled, the system did not wait. It split. Local authorities acted on immediate risk. They evacuated buildings, they closed sites, they prioritised containment. Police forces on the front line managed crowd pressure in real time. They faced confrontation without a clear end state. Meanwhile, central departments operated on different priorities: legal exposure, communications, institutional image. No part was acting unlawfully, but they were no longer acting together. This divergence created a dangerous imbalance. Frontline officers were instructed to maintain restraint without clarity on what success looked like. Councils made urgent decisions without assurance that national policy would support them. Each layer protected its own remit. No layer held the whole picture. This is how systems fracture, not through rebellion, but through misalignment. To the public, the complexity was invisible. What they saw was inconsistency. Orders changed by location, responses differed by authority, explanations shifted by department. The state appeared present but not unified, and unity is the foundation of trust. When citizens sense that institutions no longer move as one, they stop waiting for direction. They draw conclusions on their own. That moment marks a profound transition from governed space to contested space, not because the law disappeared, but because coordination did. When the crowds disperse, what remains is not the damage, it is the precedent. This was not a spontaneous reaction without reason. It was the consequence of prolonged concerns, heard too late. Warnings were raised, they were recorded, they were processed, but they were not acted on. And when systems respond only after tragedy, they send a clear message: patience brings nothing. That is the danger. A stable society depends on early response, not late reaction, on trust built quietly, not authority enforced loudly. When people believe their concerns disappear into bureaucracy, they stop waiting. They start acting. Not because they want disorder, but because they see no other channel left. This is not a defence of unrest. It is a warning about what happens when prevention fails. Governments do not lose control when streets erupt. They lose control long before, when listening is replaced by delay and responsibility is replaced by procedure. The lesson is simple and unforgiving. If leadership moves only when forced, pressure will always return, stronger, faster, and harder to contain. Trust, once broken, does not return with statements. It returns only when people see that warnings matter before blood is spilled. That is the real cost, and that is the real warning.